Chapter 52. Graham smiled when he felt the jet's big push rocket him up and away from St. Louis, turning across the sun's path south and east at last toward home. Molly and Willie would be there. Let's don't jack around about who's sorry for what. I'll pick you up in Marathon, kiddo, she said on the phone. In time, he hoped he would remember the few good moments, the satisfaction of seeing people at work who were deeply committed to their skills. He supposed you could find that anywhere if you knew enough about what you were watching. It would have been presumptuous to thank Lloyd Bowman and Beverly Katz, so he just told them on the telephone that he was glad to have worked with them again. One thing bothered him a little, the way he felt when Crawford turned from the telephone in Chicago and said, "It's Gateway." Possibly that was the most intense and savage joy that had ever burst in him. It was unsettling to know that the happiest moment of his life had come then, in that stuffy jury room in the city of Chicago, when even before he knew, he knew. He didn't tell Lloyd Bowman how it felt. He didn't have to. You know, when his theorem rang the cherries, Pythagoras gave 100 oxen to the Muse. Bowman said, "Nothing sweeter, is there? Don't answer. It lasts better if you don't spend it talking." Graham grew more impatient the closer he got to home and to Molly. In Miami, he had to go out on the apron to board Aunt Lula, the old DC-3 that flew to Marathon. He liked DC-3s. He liked everything today. Aunt Lula was built when Graham was 5 years old, and her wings were always dirty with a film of oil that blew back from the engines. He had great confidence in her. He ran to her as though she had landed in a jungle clearing to rescue him. Esmeralda's lights were coming on as the island passed under her wing. Graham could still see whitecaps on the Atlantic side. In minutes, they were descending to Marathon. It was like the first time he came to Marathon. He had come aboard Aunt Lula that time too, and often afterward he went to the airfield at dusk to watch her coming in, slow and steady, flaps down, fire flickering out her exhausts, and all the passengers safe behind their lidded windows. The takeoffs were good to watch as well, but when the old airplane made her great arc to the north, it left him sad and empty, and the air was acrid with goodbyes. He learned to watch only the landings and hellos. That was before Molly. With a final grunt, the airplane swung onto the apron. Graham saw Molly and Willie standing behind the fence, under the floodlights. Willie was solidly planted in front of her. He'd stay there until Graham joined them. Only then would he wander along, examining whatever interested him. Graham liked him for that. Molly was the same height as Graham, 5'10". A level kiss in public carries a pleasant jolt, possibly because level kisses usually are exchanged in bed. Willie offered to carry his suitcase. Graham gave him the suit bag instead. Riding home to Sugarloaf Key, Molly driving, Graham remembered the things picked out by the headlights, imagined the rest. When he opened the car door in the yard, he could hear the sea. Willie went into the house, holding the suit bag on top of his head, the bottom flapping against the backs of his legs. Graham stood in the yard absently, brushing mosquitoes away from his face. Molly put her hand on his cheek. "What you ought to do is come on in the house before you get eaten up." He nodded. His eyes were wet. She waited a moment longer, tucked her head, and peered up at him, wiggling her eyebrows. "Tanqueray martinis, steaks, hugging and stuff. Right this way. And the light bill and the water bill and lengthy conversations with my child." She added out the side of her mouth. And that is the end of chapter 52. Let's carry on with chapter 53. We're almost there. Chapter 53. Graham and Molly wanted very much for it to be the same again between them, to go on as they had before. When they saw that it was not the same, the unspoken knowledge lived with them like unwanted company in the house. The mutual assurances they tried to exchange in the dark, and in the day passed through some refraction that made them miss the mark. Molly had never looked better to him. From a painful distance, he admired her unconscious grace. She tried to be good to him, but she had been to Oregon and she had raised with the dead. Willie felt it, and he was cool to Graham, maddeningly polite. A letter came from Crawford. Molly brought it in the mail and didn't mention it. It contained a picture of the Sherman family, printed from movie film. Not everything had burned, Crawford's note explained. A search of the fields across the house had turned this picture up, along with a few things the explosion had blown far from the fire. "These people were probably on his itinerary," Crawford wrote. "Safe now. Thought you'd like to know." Graham showed it to Molly. "See, that's why," he said. "That's why it was worth it." "I know," she said. "I understand that. I really do." The bluefish were running under the moon. Molly packed suppers, and they fished, and they built fires, and none of it was any good. Grandpa and Mamma sent Willie a picture of his pony, and he tacked it to the wall in his room. The 5th day home was the last day before Graham and Molly would go back to work in Marathon. They fished in the surf, walking a quarter-mile around the carving beach to a place where they had luck before. Graham had decided to talk to both of them together. The expedition did not begin well. Willie pointedly put aside the rod Graham had rigged for him and brought the new surf-casting rod his grandfather sent with him. They fished for 3 hours in silence. Graham opened his mouth to speak several times, but it didn't seem right. He was tired of being disliked. Graham caught 4 snappers using sand fleas for bait. Willie caught nothing. He was casting a big rapala with 3 treble hooks, which his grandfather had given him. He was fishing too fast, casting again and again, retrieving too fast, until he was red-faced and his t-shirt stuck to him. Graham waded into the water, scooped sand in the backwash of a wave, and picked up the 2 sand fleas, their legs waving from their shells. "How about one of these, partner?" He held out a sand flea to Willie. "I'll use the rapala. It was my father's. Did you know that?" "No," Graham said. He glanced at Molly. She hugged her knees and looked far off at a frigate bird sailing high. She got up and brushed the sand off. "I'll go fix some sandwiches," she said. When Molly had gone, Graham was tempted to talk to the boy by himself. No. Willie would feel whatever his mother felt. He'd wait and get them both together when she came back. He'd do it this time. She wasn't gone long, and she came back without the sandwiches, walking swiftly on the packed sand above the surf. "Jack Crawford's on the phone. I told him you'd call him back, but he said it's urgent," she said, examining a fingernail. "Better hurry." Graham blushed. He stuck the butt of his rod in the sand and trotted toward the dunes. It was quicker than going around the beach if you carried nothing to catch in the brush. He heard a low, whirring sound carried on the wind, wary of a rattler. He scanned the ground as he went into the scrub cedar. He saw boots beneath the brush, the glint of a lens, and a flash of khaki rising. He looked into the yellow eyes of Francis Dollarhide, and fear raised the hammers of his heart. Snuck of a pistol action working, an automatic coming up, and Graham kicked at it, struck it at the muzzle, bloomed pale yellow in the sun, and the pistol flew into the brush. Graham on his back, something burning in the left side of his chest, slid headfirst down the dune onto the beach. Dollarhide leaped high to land on Graham's stomach with both feet, and he had the knife out and never looked up at the thin screaming from the water's edge. He pinned Graham with his knees, raised the knife high, and grunted as he brought it down. The blade missed Graham's eye and crunched deep into his cheek. Dollarhide rocked forward and put his weight on the handle of the knife to shove it through Graham's head. The rod whistled as Molly swung it hard at Dollarhide's face. The big rapala's hook sank solidly in his cheek, and the reel screamed, paying out line as she drew back to strike again. He growled, grabbed at his face as she hit him, and the treble hooks jammed into his hand as well. One hand free, one hand hooked to his face, he tugged the knife out and started after her. Graham rolled over, got to his knees, then his feet, eyes wild and choking blood as he ran from 𝘈𝘁𝘵𝘵, ran until he collapsed. Molly ran for the dunes, Willie ahead of her. 𝘈𝘁𝘵 was coming, dragging the rod. It caught on a bush and pulled him howling to a stop before he thought to cut the line. "Run, baby! Run, baby! Run, baby! Don't look back!" She gasped. Her legs were long, and she shoved the boy ahead of her, the crashing ever closer in the brush behind them. They had 100 yards on him when they left the dunes, 70 yards when they reached the house. Scrambling up the stairs, clawing in Will's closet. To Willie, "Stay here." Down again to meet him. Down to the kitchen, not too ready, fumbling with the speed loader. She forgot the stance and she forgot the front sight, but she got a good two-handled grip on the pistol, and as the door exploded inward, she blew a rat hole through his thigh. "Mother!" And she shot him in the face as he slid down the door, facing, and she shot him in the face as he sat on the floor. And she ran to him and shot him twice in the face as he sprawled against the wall, scalp down to his chin and his hair on fire. Willie tore up a sheet and went to look for Will. His legs were shaking and he fell several times crossing the yard. The sheriff's deputies and ambulances came before Molly ever thought to call them. She was taking a shower when they came in the house behind their pistols. She was scrubbing hard at the flecks of blood and bone on her hair and face, and she couldn't answer when a deputy tried to talk to her through the shower curtain. One of the deputies finally picked up the dangling telephone receiver and talked to Crawford in Washington, who had heard the shots and summoned them. "I don't know. They're bringing him in now," the deputy said. He looked out the window as the litter passed. "It don't look good to me," he said. Chapter 54. On the wall at the foot of the bed, there was a clock with numbers large enough to read through the drugs and the pain. When Will Graham could open his right eye, he saw the clock and knew where he was. An intensive care unit. He knew to watch the clock. Its movement assured him that this was passing, would pass. That's what it was there for. It said 4 o'clock. He had no idea which 4 o'clock, and he didn't care, as long as his hands were moving. He drifted away. The clock said 8 when he opened his eye again. Someone was to the side of him now. Cautiously, he turned his eye. It was Molly, looking out the window. She was thin. He tried to speak, but a great ache filled the left side of his head when he moved his jaw. His head and his chest did not throb together. It was more of a syncopation. He made a noise as she left the room. The window was light when they pulled and tugged at him and did things that made the cords in his neck stand out. Yellow light when he saw Crawford's face over him. Graham managed to wink. When Crawford grinned, Graham could see a piece of spinach between his teeth. Odd. Crawford eschewed most vegetables. Graham made writing motions on the sheet beneath his hand. Crawford slid his notebook under Graham's hand and put a pen between his fingers. "Willie okay?" he wrote. "Yeah, he's fine," Crawford said. "Molly, too. She's been in here while you were asleep. Dolarhyde's dead, Will. I promise you he's dead. I took the prints myself and had Price match them. There's no question. He's dead." Graham drew a question mark on the pad. "We'll get into it. I'll be here. I can tell you the whole thing when you feel good. They only give me 5 minutes. Now," Graham wrote. "Has the doctor talked to you? No? About you first. You'll be all right. Your eye's just swollen shut from a deep stab wound in the face. They've got it fixed, but it'll take time. They took out your spleen, but who needs a spleen? Price left his in Burma in '91. A nurse pecked on the glass. "I've got to go. They don't respect credentials, nothing around here. They just throw you out when the time's up. See you later." Molly was in the ICU waiting room. A lot of tired people were. Crawford went to her. "Molly." "Hello, Jack," she said. "You're looking really well. Want to give him a face transplant?" "Don't, Molly." "Did you look at him?" "Yes." "I didn't think I could look at him, but I did." "They'll fix him up. The doctor told me. They can do it. You want somebody to stay with you, Molly? I brought Phyllis down. She..." "No, don't do anything else for me." She turned away, fumbling for a tissue. She saw the letter when she opened her purse. Expensive 𝘈 stationery that he had seen before. Crawford hated this. He had to do it. "Molly." "What is it?" "Will got a letter?" "Yes." "Did the nurse give it to you?" "Yes, she gave it to me. They're holding some flowers from all his friends in Washington, too." "May I see the letter?" "I'll give it to him when he feels like it." "Please, let me see it." "Why?" "Because he doesn't need to hear it from that particular person." Something was wrong with the expression on his face, and she looked down at the letter and dropped it. Personal. A lipstick rolled across the floor. Stooping to pick up Molly's things, Crawford heard her heels tap fast as she left him, abandoning her purse. He gave the purse to the change nurse. Crawford knew it would be nearly impossible for Lecter to get what he would need, but with Lecter he took no chances. He had an intern fluoroscope the letter in the X-ray department. Crawford slit the envelope on all sides with a penknife and examined its inside surface and the note for any stain or dust. They would have live for scrubbing at Baltimore Hospital, but there was a pharmacy. Satisfied at last, he read it. "Dear Will, here we are, you and I, languishing in our hospitals. You have your pain, and I am without my books. The learned Dr. Chilton has seen to that. We live in a primate time, don't we, Will? Neither savage nor wise. Half measures are the curse of it. Any rational society would either kill me or give me my books. I wish you a speedy convalescence and hope you won't be very ugly. I think of you often, Hannibal Lecter. The intern looked at his watch. You need me anymore? No, Crawford said. Where's the �々𝘸𝘸𝘕? When Crawford returned in 4 hours for the next visiting period, Molly wasn't in the waiting room, and she wasn't in the intensive care unit. Graham was awake. He drew a question mark on the pad at once. D. Dead How, he wrote under it. Crawford told him. Graham lay still for a full minute. Then he wrote, Lambed How. Okay, Crawford said. St. Louis. Dollahide must have been looking for Reba McLean. He came in the lab while we were there and spotted us. His prints were on an open furnace room window. It wasn't reported until yesterday. Graham tapped the pad. Body? We think it was a guy named Arnold Lang. He's missing. His car was found in Memphis. It had been wiped down. They'll run me out in a minute. Let me give it to you in order. Dollahide knew we were there. He gave us the slip at the plant and drove to a Cervical Supreme station at Lindbergh and US 270. Arnold Lang worked there. Reba McLean said Dollahide had a tiff with a service station attendant on Saturday before last. We think it was Lang. He snuffed Lang and took his body to the house. Then he went by Reba McLean's. She was in a clinch with Ralph Mandy at the door. He shot Mandy and dragged him into the hedge. The police came in. For God's sake, it's police business, Crawford said. He talked fast as she pulled him by the coat sleeve to the door. He chloroformed Reba McLean and took her to the house. The body was there, Crawford said from the hall. Graham had to wait 4 hours to find out the rest. He gave her this and that, you know. Will I kill you or not? Crawford said as he came in the door. You know, the routine about the key hanging around his neck? That was to make sure she felt the body, so she could tell us she certainly did feel the body. All right. It's this way and that way. I can't stand to see you burn, he says, and blows Lang's head off with a 12 gauge. Lang was perfect. He didn't have any teeth anyway. Maybe Dollahide knew the maxillary arc survives fires a lot of times. Who knows what he knew? Anyway, Lang didn't have any maxillary arc after Dollahide got through with him. He shot the head off Lang's body, and he must have tipped a chair or something for the thud of the body falling. He'd hang the key around Lang's neck. Now, Reba's scrambling around looking for the key. Dollahide's in the corner watching. Her ears are ringing from the shotgun. She won't hear his little noises. He started a fire, but he hasn't put the gas to it yet. He's got gas in the room. She got out of the house okay. If she had panicked too much, ran into a wall or something, or frozen, I guess he'd have sapped her and dragged her outside. She wouldn't have known how she got out. But she had to get out for it to work. Oh, hell, here comes that nurse. Graham wrote fast. How vehicle. You have to admire this. Crawford said. He knew he'd have to leave his van at the house. He couldn't drive 2 vehicles out there, and he needed a getaway piece. That is what he did. He made Lang hang up the service station tow truck to his van. He snuffed Lang, locked the station, and towed his van out to his house. Then he left the tow truck on a dirt road back in the fields behind the house, got back in his van, and went after Reva. When she got out of the house all right, he dragged out the dynamite, put the gasoline around the fire, and lammed out the back. He drove the tow truck back to the service station, left it, and got into Lang's car. No loose ends. It drove me crazy until we figured it out. I know it's right because he left a couple of prints on the tow bar. We probably met him in the road when we were going up there to the house. Yes, ma'am, I'm coming. Yes, ma'am. Graham wanted to ask a question, but it was too late. Molly took the next 5-minute visit. Graham wrote, I love you, on Crawford's pad. She nodded and held his hand. A minute later, he wrote, Willie okay? She nodded. Here? She looked up at him too quickly from the pad. She made a kiss with her mouth and pointed to the approaching nurse. He tugged her thumb. Where? He insisted, underlining twice. Oregon, she said. Crawford came a final time. Graham was ready with his note. It said, Teeth? His grandmother's, Crawford said. The ones were found in the house were his grandmother's. St. Louis PD located one Ned Vogue. Dollahad's mother was Vogue's stepmother. Vogue saw Mrs. Dollahad when he was a kid, and he never forgot the teeth. That's what I was calling you about when you ran into Dollahad. The Smithsonian had just called me. They finally had given the teeth from the Missouri authorities, just to examine for their own satisfaction. They noticed the upper part was made of vulcanite instead of acrylic like they use now. Nobody's made vulcanite plates in 35 years. Dollahad's had a new acrylic pair just like them, made to fit him. The new ones were on his body. Smithsonian looked at some features on them. The fluting, they said, and reggae. Chinese manufacture. The old ones were Swiss. He had a key on them, too, for a locker in Miami. Big book in there, kind of a diary. Hell of a thing. I'll have it when you want to see it. Look, sport, I have to go back to Washington. I'll get back down here at the weekend if I can. You gonna be okay? Graham drew a question mark, then scratched it out and wrote, Sure. The nurse came after Crawford left. She shot some Demerol into his intravenous line, and the clock grew fuzzy. He couldn't keep up with the second hand. He wondered if 𝘠𝘕𝘠𝘠 would work on your feelings. He could hold Molly a while with his face, until they finished fixing it anyway. That would be a cheap shot. Hold her for what? He was drifting off, and he hoped he wouldn't dream. He did drift between memory and dream, but it wasn't so bad. He didn't dream of Molly leaving or of �々𝘰𝘠. It was a long memory dream of 𝘔𝘠𝘠, interrupted by lights shone in his face and the gasp and hiss of the blood pressure cuff. It was spring, soon after he shot Garrett Jacob Hobbs, when Graham visited 𝘔𝘠𝘠. On a soft April day, he walked across the asphalt road to Bloody Pond. The new grass, still light green, grew down the slope to the water. The clear water had risen into the grass, and the grass was visible in the water, growing down, down, as though it covered the bottom of the pond. Graham knew what it had happened in April 1962. He sat down in the grass, felt the damp ground through his trousers. A tourist automobile went by, and after it had passed, Graham saw movement behind it in the road. The car had broken a chicken snake's back. It slid in endless figure eights across itself in the center of the asphalt road, sometimes showing its black back, sometimes its pale belly. 𝘔𝘠𝘠's awesome presence hooded him with cold, though he was sweating in the mid-spring sun. Graham got up off the grass, his trousers damp behind. He was lightheaded. The snake looped on itself. He stood over it, picked it up by the end of its smooth, dry tail, and with a long, fluid motion, cracked it like a whip. Its brains zigged into the pond. A bream rose to them. He had thought 𝘔𝘠𝘠 haunted, its beauty sinister like fangs. Now, drifting between memory and narcotic sleep, he saw that 𝘔𝘠𝘠 was not sinister. It was indifferent. Beautiful 𝘔𝘠𝘠 could witness anything. Its unforgivable beauty simply underscored the indifference of nature, the green machine. The loveliness of 𝘔𝘠𝘠 mocked our plight. He rused and watched the mindless clock, but he couldn't stop thinking. In the green machine, there is no mercy. We make mercy, manufacture it in the parts that have overgrown our basic reptile brain. There is no murder. We make murder, and it matters only to us. Graham knew too well that he contained all the elements to make murder, perhaps mercy too. He understood uncomfortably well, though. He wondered if, in the great body of mankind, in the minds of men set on civilization, the vicious urges we control in ourselves and the dark instinctive knowledge of those urges function like crippled virus the body arms against. He wondered if old, awful urges are the virus that makes vaccine. Yes, he had been wrong about 𝘔𝘠𝘠. 𝘔𝘠𝘠 isn't haunted. Men are haunted. 𝘔𝘠𝘠 doesn't care.